Great.
Sweet. All right, good. Well, good to see everybody here. Some familiar faces and some faces that are new to me.
Okay, thank you.
So this presentation, we're going to be looking over just like where the market's at right now. For those of you who don't know, Marcus Millichap. There we go. So this is what we're going to be going over. Marcus Millichap, we're a commercial real estate brokerage based out of USA. We're pretty large within the States. Louder? All right. We're pretty large within the States, and so I was brought on as the third hire for the research area. I'm not technically in the research division of our brokerage, but I was brought on to expand our insights for our Ontario offices. So part of what I do is I do, typical market analysis you'll see, but I like to explore a little bit. So I do some demographics, some residential, but mostly almost all commercial side. So, when me and Alex talked earlier this year, we figured it'd be good to show you guys the process of doing research, and then a little bit of how you guys could do your own research, because there's a lot of people here who are agents, or I think mortgage specialists could benefit, because you guys have to do a lot of relationship building, and so being able to do your own research and understand where the market's at is going to be helpful. But before we get into that, I'm just going to give you a sort of state of the market, because nobody has a clue what's happening. So I'm just going to tell you that I will probably be wrong on like half the things I say, but I'm just joining the likes of everybody else. So I have to do the obligatory advertising. Look, we're the best brokerage, blah, 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 blah. No, actually, I'll be honest, like out of all the commercial real estate brokerages, Marcus Millichap is my favorite. I chose to work here for a reason. We have a very collaborative approach. We're very unique in the sense of the scale of projects we do. Most guys at this scale don't have a very highly collaborative approach, and we could talk more about that if you guys are interested in how our approach is unique. But we're number one in retail in North America. We do over $100 billion in transaction volume. We do 12,000 sales last year. This year is going to be down a little bit just because of where the market's at. And we also do we have a capital core, and we just launched the capital core in Canada in March. So if you're a mortgage specialist and you're I don't want to move, let me know. We did $16 billion in financing last year, or we did 2,000 financing deals, and I think it was $16 billion. So yeah, and we also have offices everywhere in the States. In the States, it's like every city you go to, we're gonna have an office there. In Canada, we have an office in Vancouver, Edmonton, Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa. So we're growing here. We've only been here for about a decade, so there's a huge growth curve for us. All right, now we get to the meaty part. I don't know why the titles look that poor, but anyway, so this is a typical chart you're gonna see these are less typical. The next ones you'll see are gonna be more typical, but this is a chart that I just wanted to make because I know there's a lot of residential guys here. And one thing that I've had to wrestle with some residential guys is like, well, why do you even need research? It's a lot of money to do research. We spend, just on our licenses for data, we spend over $1 million a year just on the license for data. And then you have to hire staff, you have to hire people with experience, so you're paying a lot of money to guys with a lot of experience. And it just gets very, very heavy on the brokers, because if you're a broker, you're the guys who fund the researchers. You guys are the revenue generators. So I wanted to just quickly highlight, and obviously we have someone from LoopNet, CoStar, we're one of their bigger clients, so I work with a lot of your coworkers. So I just want to highlight two charts, very simple, very basic. You would never really see this inside of a brokerage. I'm just kind of showing you so I could give you guys context of why commercial real estate needs research. The first reason is that when we list a property, it doesn't sell right away. Apartments are really in demand in a lot of ways, and a typical apartment's going to sell within you can see 25% will sell within 3 months. Within 6 months, 75% will sell. But you're not getting all the apartments selling until you're about 15 months into a deal, right? So that's for apartment building. That's not for individual units, right? This is commercial deals. Whereas if you had a condo, so that'd be an individual unit, that's typically selling according to Trev at the 20-day mark. So there's two very different timelines, right? So one is quite executable, quite quick. The other one takes a lot of time. The other reason is that the price difference, right? Like when you buy a condo, you're buying one unit for, let's say, $700,000. When you buy an apartment building, the average price, that's a little bit high, I would say, but I mean, that's the data I got from Altus is $18.5 million. It could be anywhere from 15 to 20 million though for an average apartment building. So just who's buying, your buyer profile is way different. When you're buying a condo, you don't need a lot of research. You just got to convince your wife, right? Or whoever your partner is. When you're buying an apartment building, you have to convince your shareholders. A lot of our buyers have pension fund money, so you have to convince the people who are managing all of the pensions And there has to be very sophisticated research. So that's why you need research, and that's why I'm here. Now, I'm gonna go over a couple key terms really quickly. If you hear me use them and you forget halfway through the slides, then just maybe put your hand up and I'll reiterate. But these are really, really simple terms. So fundamentals just refers to supply and demand, right? Strong fundamentals means low supply, high demand. Poor fundamentals mean high supply, low demand, right? Pretty simple. The way we measure supply and demand at a very basic level is supply is indicated by either you use absorption or vacancy rate. We're gonna go with vacancy rate because it's the more simple of the two. Sometimes you use both. Vacancy rate is what it sounds like. How much of your square footage is not being used or not being leased, right? Well, it's more about who's paying, right? So if you have 10 buildings, 9 buildings are full, 1 building there's no contract on it, it's not revenue generating, then you have 10% vacancy, right? So availability rate, this is the amount of space that's being marketed for sale or for lease, right? So typically availability obviously is gonna be higher than vacancy because you're gonna start marketing buildings ahead of time that, oh, this is gonna come for sale, right? And there's still a tenant there because you're preparing the market to, get their stuff together. Price per square foot are typical demand measurements. So if you're in most asset classes, you're gonna be doing price per square foot. So this is the most prominent price measurement. Price per unit is gonna be used in apartments, but again, this changes, but these are just the basics. Asking rent is gonna be the amount of money that a property owner's asking. And effective rent's gonna be what the tenant's actually paying, keeping it very simple. But this is the basics of it. This does not look like that on my computer, but anyway, so this is gonna be where you guys all are here for probably. This is the economic snapshot of Ontario. The main thing I want you guys to know is Ontario has unbelievable, historic, massive population growth. I mean, you read about immigration, right? You guys read about the immigration headlines, right? 1 million people coming a year. 40% of them come to Ontario. It's insane. 15 to 20%, depending on the stats you use, are going to come to Toronto, right? Then you have to think that those are PRs. We also have students, we have 500,000 students coming to Canada a year. And I think this year we might even be closer to 700K. I'm not 100% sure what we're on track for. But I mean, when you take it to low end, 500,000 students come, how many universities are here, right? Maybe 40% of those students come here, maybe even half. I haven't looked into that, but I'm just putting that teaser there. Is that, okay, when you have such strong population growth, I mean, like, look at the growth line here, like, it's really simple. You're going up straight, but you're gonna compare that progression to right here to here, it's unbelievable. I mean, Canada as a whole, we are 5 times America's population rate last year, I think. We are like New York versus Toronto, I think we're like 7xing them or something like that on population growth. So there's a lot. This drives everything. Population growth is the single most important thing for you to take away right now, because this is what's keeping our economy from a nominal recession. So we should, like you guys might probably hear in the news a lot, it's like, are we in a recession, are we not in a recession? Well, population growth is what's keeping us not in a recession. So I'll show you, I pulled this from TD. So this is real GDP in the orange bar, right? Typically, real GDP, you want it to be a little bit stronger than what we're at now, but I mean, when you consider that the economic headwinds we're in right now and the global uncertainty, supply chains still are disrupted, it's not bad. But again, we have to remember, this is not per capita, that's just real GDP after you adjust for inflation, right? Nominal GDP looks really good, I mean, on the outlier, right? Like, looking from the outside in, nominal GDP looks good, but we have to remember, it's like, that's driven by population growth. It's not driven by a strong economy, right? Employment, solid in 2023, but it's gonna tick down. I mean, we just had, I think, one of the biggest contractions in job vacancies we've ever had as a country in the month of, in the summer. And, job vacancies were at 1 million during COVID. So you had 1 million jobs vacant, you had roughly 19 million people who are in the workforce. Now, we're at, I want to say close to 20 million people in the workforce. And our vacancies are contracted to, I think, around 650, 700, something like that. It'll probably reach 500,000 pretty soon. So really rapidly, job vacancies are coming down. What does that mean? Is that our employment market is going to tighten up, right? So 2024, you'll see TD's predicting pretty much no change in employment. And you have to remember, this is at the same time population is growing, which is going to lead to increase in unemployment. That's the basics of where we're at as the economy. I'm going really quick just because it really isn't something you would go over in a couple minutes. But main takeaway from this is population growth is driving up nominal GDP. On a per capita basis, you could even make the argument we're already in a recession, right? I think we're 2 or 3 quarters of negative per capita GDP growth. So buying power is one thing to consider, but we're in commercial real estate. Well, I'm in commercial real estate. So for me, what really matters is what's the gross amount of dollars moving around, because that's what drives sales. So for us, this doesn't look as bad maybe if you're somebody who's a small shop owner and you're relying on the people. You're not an essentials good, you're not a luxury good owner, you're a middling sort of, you know, goods provider. Discretionary purchasing power is so important to you, right? So this means a lot of different things depending on where you are at along the curve of the economy. We'll have questions later because I'm sure there's questions, but we need to get into the CRE because that's the meat of commercial real estate right now is industrial. So you're going to see this chart, you're going to think industrial is not that big because land is taking up half the chart, right? 40% of all deals are land. That's kind of normal though. I mean, land's normally around that level. You have to think because land is the first thing that goes into all these other asset classes, right? You want to build a new retail site, well you have to buy land, right? You want to build a new apartment, well, you have to buy land. So land's always going to be up the bigger, especially in Ontario. We think in Canada, oh wow, we have so much land, we should be growing like crazy. But you have to remember that we don't have a lot of infrastructure. And without shovel-ready land, you have a lot, I mean, according to our provincial policy, we need to have, I think it was, after you account for annual monitoring, we need 4 million square feet of shovel-ready land for housing, and we're at, I want to say we're at a shortfall of like, we're at 3 million, 2.9 million, so we're short 1 million square feet of shovel-ready land. So there's a lot of things to take in. When it comes to land, there's a premium because, not because we don't have a lot of land, it's because we don't have a lot of shovel-ready land. We don't have a lot of infrastructure available for that land. So that's where land's at. If you're in land, it's the hardest asset class to price, it's the hardest asset class to report on because you know, it changes so much depending on the intersection you're at. And so that's land. We're not going to talk about land the rest of the day. We're going to talk about everything else because that's what I work with. Well, we do res land. We have a huge res land team, but they have their own research. So industrial, office, retail, apartment, hotels, that's what I'm pretty okay at. And industrial is the biggest thing to take away. Unless you're in land and you just want to know commercial real estate, industrial is where it's at right now. They have the biggest supply growth right now. They have a lot of construction. They've increased construction. They doubled construction in the past 3 years. So long term, the outlook looks a little bit different. But main thing to take away is this year, industrial is the big heavy hitter. It used to be office. You need to remember, Toronto is the office capital of Canada. Office used to be by far the biggest asset class. So there's a huge shift. You would never have seen this 10 years ago or 5 years ago. As it comes to purchaser profile, we have a lot of private investors in Canada. I mean, typically private investors will be roughly half of the deals. And private investors are the ones who are most likely going to execute deals right now because they are less sensitive to interest rate changes. Whereas institutions, they have to account for volatility in interest rates at a much higher scale because they typically have higher debt levers. Let's go to the next slide. Alright, so let's start looking over different asset classes. So in Ontario, I have on the left-hand chart, it's going to be overlooking industrial, office, retail. On the right-hand chart, it's going to be Ottawa, Toronto, Golden Horseshoe. This data is taken from, it's from Altus. This data specifically, I did use CoStar in the next slide, you'll see. So you'll see the obvious thing, right? Orange bar in the left chart. Toronto's going to have the strongest pricing, obvious, right? You're going to see the next obvious thing, which is that, well, maybe not obvious for you guys, but retail is doing a higher price per square foot, right? We haven't built retail in 20 plus years. I mean, most of the malls you walk by, they're probably built in the 70s, right? Most of the storefronts you walk by, they're probably built in the 70s. Unless it's in the bottom of an apartment building or condo building, it's probably not a new retail space. So pricing for a long time has been very competitive in retail. And then you also think about the tenants, right? So the interesting trend I want you guys to take away, besides the, industrial used to be, I think, industrial used to be a fifth of office pricing on a square foot basis. I could be wrong. Now, I mean, it's catching up really quickly. I really should have charted that, but I just didn't have time. If you guys are interested, just give me a call or give me an email. We can work on it. But the other thing I wanted you guys to take away is Ottawa, right? We think Ottawa is a big city, capital of Canada. Pricing's going to be super high. It's going to be similar to Toronto. It's not even close. And in fact, if you're in office or retail, simply because of the Toronto effect, office and retail is going to be more expensive than the Golden Horseshoe. So think Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, Hamilton, London, things like that. But I mean, There's so much variation within the Golden Horseshoe. I just want to warn you guys, like this is just a catch-all when it comes to Golden Horseshoe. In terms of where you want to be if you're selling real estate, it might be Ottawa because Ottawa is much more state. There's a lot of different things in Ottawa, which we could get to in the Q&A if you guys are curious. I don't know who works in Ottawa, so I don't want to get too deep into it. Apartments. This is another one that I found really interesting. So Toronto is orange, Ottawa is gray, and Golden Horseshoe is blue. Golden Horseshoe and Toronto are experiencing pretty strong price corrections right now after a massive run up in apartment pricing. But Ottawa's staying stable. We have to have an explanation. Why is Ottawa staying stable? I think Ottawa's staying stable, in my opinion. I would probably say that there's a couple things. First is that Ottawa's always a little bit less volatile than Toronto and Golden Horseshoe. When things get hot, less people go there than they do to Toronto and Golden Horseshoe. There's been a huge growth thesis for a lot of investors in the Golden Horseshoe, less so in Ottawa, and there's legitimate reasons for that. And then I guess the third thing, and this is a really big thing, is not the majority, but a huge chunk of Ottawa's economy is public. Public doesn't go up, public doesn't go down that much. So it's stable, right? So it's been relatively flatlined, slight decline, but not very much. But again, that's something we're gonna get into in the apartment slide. Industrial overview. So how am I doing for time? I'm good? All right, so industrial overview. So I mean, this is the golden goose, or this is the beautiful queen of the day. Everybody wants to be industrial because, while the pricing has gone down this year, I mean, this is a little bit of I don't want to say it's an outlier, but 2022, there was just so much money going into it. There's so much development going into it. It was just so hot. In the low interest rate environment, pricing was so low, people could buy it like crazy. There's a lot of people who are coming from the States and buying up here. It was a little bit of an unusual year. But I would say 2023, we're looking at something that's a little bit more expected. You get expected a little bit more, which is significantly stronger than pre-pandemic times on total volume and transaction volume. I was at a talk with RealCan CEO, and he was saying, I never thought a box would be able to get me so much money. And that's what industrial is. You walk by Amazon warehouse or drive by it, and it's just really just a box. It's not that complex. It's nothing like a high-rise, right, apartment building. But it makes a lot of money right now. So you can see from 2020, I believe it was 25% of, 2020, 2019 was 25% of market share went to market investment. Share of investment went to industrial. Now we're at 33-ish%. We're in the mid-30s. So I mean, that's a massive paradigm switch. That's not something to look over. This is when a percentage point here is billions of dollars. And so it's a huge paradigm shift in where the market's going. It's favoring industrial right now. You'll see, obviously, hotels are always small. I don't know if you know, but Canada has a very, very unusually small hotel industry. But that being said, I mean, that's changing too. Multifamily has been doing pretty well, and you can imagine why, right? Housing crisis. People think housing crisis, they want to buy multifamily. And then retail and office are declining a bit. Now, I would give this a caveat. So office, for obvious reasons, is declining. I think you guys all know. If you're here, you probably know. But retail is actually doing quite well. It's just that it's so expensive, people would rather move their dollars into industrial. It's not that retail is performing poorly. It's just that it makes more sense for a lot of guys to go into to go into industrial. And also, retail's kind of hard to buy right now. Yorkdale we'll get into it in the next slide, but Yorkdale just hit $2,000 per square foot on rent. Wow. So, I mean, you have 1,000 square foot, you're spending $1 million, I don't know, someone do the math. So, it's a lot of money. Office overview. So this is, I guess, what, in commercial real estate and what we do in our brokerage, this is one of the hotter topics because we actually sold a lot of offices. And now, obviously, slowed down quite a bit. And the money tap isn't pouring like it did from 2013 to 2019. Offices look really good in 2022, but Royal Bank Plaza sold for $1.2 billion in 2022. So take it with a grain of salt, right? You have $1 billion in just one building, so it really didn't do as good as you think. And offices is an interesting asset class because it really depends who you ask and how much office they own when you ask them how the market's looking. Office that's well located, well situated close to transit. If you're south of Lakeshore, you're positioned phenomenally. If you're an Ontarioist in general, you're actually gonna have better performance than you would expect in a suburban office. Office is really very much just like, depends on the building itself. I mean, amenities are huge. In Quebec, I saw an office building out an ice rink to their office to keep tenants, you know? Is that financially feasible everywhere? No, but it's where the market's going, right? So office is it varies a lot. This is the big news though. I mean, you have to remember, guys, office and construction in general, especially with larger buildings, so office, multifamily especially, they're so large, they lag demand. There's usually about a 3 to 5 year lag between demand and construction deliveries. So all these, the blue bars deliveries, that's how many buildings came available to the market, and you could buy it and move into it, right? Deliveries are so strong, 2020, 21, 22, CoStar is predicting mass deliveries 2023, 2024, and that sounds really bad, but these buildings are actually part of the buildings that are gonna get a lot of demand because they're well located, good amenities, strong usually transit options, so those buildings aren't gonna be the problem. The problem is the buildings that are already existing. They're gonna struggle with competing. The Class B offices will struggle with competing with these Class A offices, right? And you're gonna see absorption. So absorption is one of those terms we didn't really go over just because it's a little bit more complicated. But absorption at a very basic level is how many square, in this case we're using net absorption, so like how many square feet came onto market and got taken up, right? Somebody occupied it. It's negative, which means that there's square footage coming to the market and no one's touching it, right? Those are usually the older offices, and the newer offices are doing well. So these are gonna do well, but these are doing poorly, and as a net, it's gonna lead to increased vacancy. You'll see some of our competitions, I don't wanna say their names, but they're gonna have much higher vacancy rate predictions. And that's, in my opinion, is because they're playing a little fast and loose, and they're using availability instead of vacancy. I mean, there's some arguments going on in the research world. But I mean, vacancy anywhere between 10 to 15%, depending on where you're at. Some markets it's 20%, so it changes a lot depending on the city. And that makes it hard for you, those of your agents, it makes it hard to compete when there's so many spaces available. It's hard to compete on pricing, it's hard to negotiate for stronger pricing. Let's just go a little quicker. So retail is actually relatively okay. I mean, I know that chart doesn't look the greatest, but you have to remember 2023, we're at the interest rates take roughly a year and a half to really hit the market and work. That's sort of what the go-to line is for economists. So if interest rates usually take around a year and a half to really work through the market, 2023 doesn't look that bad because we've had, 10 rate hikes, working through the market. So retail is actually doing pretty well on pricing, and the big takeaway in terms of this right-hand chart is that there's not much change in deliveries and absorption, really. There really isn't much. I mean, yeah, it's 230,000 square feet, but retail has millions of square feet, right? So it's not a ton of change in terms of supply. And this is the other thing, is the vacancy. This is where you have to be careful with researchers, because I did this, and I don't think anyone noticed. But when you look at the right-hand axis, the vacancy on this slide, 0 to 16%, right? The vacancy on this slide is 1.65 to 2.15. So the green lines, you gotta pay attention to those, because we do that all the time in research. We play around with the axes. It depends on the story we're trying to tell. I'm telling you that so you guys are careful when you read the research report. But this is really good. I mean, this vacancy, it pretty much means if a retail space comes to market, it's either absolute trash and needs to get demolished, or it's gonna be taken off the market within a day or two. I mean, like, there's nothing. If you have any vacancy under 2%, it's pretty much means there's no space available. So that's impressive, incredible actually. Now, apartment overview. So this is probably the one that you guys are most interested in, because those of you who are in residential, or those of you who have investment condos, it affects you, because what happens in the rental market impacts what happens in the residential market. So when we say apartment, we're not thinking obviously condo ownership, we're thinking purpose-built rental, right? So apartment investment activity has been slow since borrowing costs have increased. That's typical. Cap rates, which is the capitalization rates, like the amount of money you're gonna be getting. The cap rates on apartment buildings are very tight, very highly sensitive to interest rate changes. So when you go from, 25 basis points, I think, in the beginning of 2021 or 2022, all the way up to where I think 5%. I mean, you should expect way bigger of a drop off, in my opinion, at apartments. And but you know what? If I talk to my apartment guys, I mean, we have some of the top agents in apartments in Canada. They will tell you it has had a massive drop off. I mean, it's 40 to 50% depending on the marketplace you're at, right? So apartments are transacting a lot less because the cap rate, the return is so tight. You could buy a treasury note, a 5-year treasury note, and make a similar yield on that than as you would as an apartment. So it's a little bit more challenging, especially when you're institutional, because you need, maybe some deals 15 million, but a lot of deals you need $60 million to buy an apartment building, right? So those little, 10 basis points matters a ton. So this is another interesting thing, is there's a ton of deliveries happening in apartments and a ton of deliveries coming to the market in Ontario. Lots of construction, right? We have more cranes, I don't know, this is just a cool fact, we have more cranes than every major American city in America combined. We have more cranes in Toronto. It's unbelievable. Miami, LA, Manhattan, just combine all the major American cities and they have less cranes than us. So cranes are a typical symbol of high-rise development, right? So with all this development happening, vacancy is still at, this is CoStar's number, I think it might be a little bit higher, but it gets the same story. It's still at roughly 60 basis points. So we're at 2% vacancy is the part where it's there's no supply, we're at 60 basis points. So vacancy is super tight, even with all these deliveries, product of the housing crisis, right? So now we're gonna get into the part that's less complicated and more for you guys just to enjoy. This is me trying to show you guys how you can do your own research at a very basic level. So you take a breather and just, no more big words, no more vacancy, no more price. Now it's simple, now it's easy. So these are the typical popular paid programs. Make sure you tell your boss if I give you guys a shout out.
I will,
Thanks. We have CoStar, we have Altus, we have SiteWise. These are typical data providers that professional brokerages pay for. They're not cheap, so you can call them and ask if you want to do it. But that's why people join commercial real estate brokerages, is we just have the buying power collectively to buy these licenses. And if you have access to them, highly recommend all 3 of them actually. I use all 3 of them every single day. They're very good services. And CoStar is actually really, you guys are kicking ass right now. You guys have grown really well, so yeah, good job to you. So what's the first step you do? You read our reports. That's the first step you do when you're trying to understand real estate.
I'm not on the research side, so.
You're not? No. Okay, so you read our reports too. Perfect. So read our reports. This is the ESG report I did with my director of research, and we do reports on everything, every asset class, every special topic that comes up. Interest rates go up, we do a report on that. Employment goes down, we do a report on that. We do a report on everything from basic economics to commercial real estate. But I will say it's get some variance too, right? I keep up with what my competition does, as any responsible researcher does, and so should you. So read everybody. Just search up M&M first. Search up M&M. And the asset class you're interested in, research report, and it'll pop up on Google. And then you can search up other names. I'm not gonna name them. Alright? That's easy. This is also easy. Read real estate news. I put stories, I put Urban Toronto, those are really popular real estate news sites, aggregators. Read them, know what's happening. If you guys are doing residential real estate and you don't know what's happening in the corner of your street, I'm sorry, but shame on you. You really need to know what's happening in your market. Because right now, it's not 2019. You can't just put a property on and sell it right away. Things are changing, right? You have to make the value proposition. And in commercial real estate, forget about it. No one's listening to you. You have no value proposition. You have to know what's happening here. So be somebody who's in the know. Be someone who's intelligent. Be somebody who can at least speak to something. You don't have to know all these fancy terms. Just speak to something, right? Access open data. This is probably, for all of you guys, something you probably don't realize, is you could go to StatsCan, get open data all the time. This is traffic counts. If you click on a dot, it tells you how much traffic is at each intersection. Now, not every single intersection is available, but if you're at a major intersection and you're trying to sell a retail site, if there's 50,000 people going through that intersection, that's a huge piece of knowledge you could use to negotiate stronger pricing on a property. So, StatsCan's full of this data. Just go spend a day, commit 12 hours of your day, and or something more reasonable, I guess, 6 hours. I don't know. And just go through the data. Go through StatsCan. There's so much there. And the fact is that this data might not always be available. I know this traffic thing is a trial, so I don't know if they're going to keep doing it. So use it while you can. Yeah, this is another thing, housing market indicators. You guys are gonna ask me about residential, I'm sure. I don't do residential, but I will do my best, and then I'll refer you to like StatsCan, housing market indicators. This is, if you guys work, look, if you're in a college with students, like if you're in a city with colleges, you have student demand, and student demand is booming, right? I read an article that George Brown has more, I think it was George Brown, no, well, it works for George Brown too, probably. They have more student immigrants, like international students, than UBC and U of T combined. So you have these small colleges that are pulling more students than massive universities.
Yeah.
So if you're in a town where there's students, like if you're in Ridgetown, right? The only thing to have there is a university, in my opinion. But like the benefit you have of having knowledge about where the students are going, how many students are coming, is huge. Because again, these are all pieces of knowledge you use to negotiate prices. Or if you're in development, it's really important to have this data for development, especially population growth. Now this is probably something a lot of you guys already do. You probably already go to Trev, you probably already go to Korea to read about real estate. They're really good resources. You can pull their data and you can make your own charts with it. You know, obviously cite them, but that's super interesting. This is probably something that none of you guys know about. It's called censusmapper.ca. Recommend you know, remembering that, censusmapper.ca. Census Mapper, it automatically uses, I think it's called the API. They automatically will take census data down to the tracks and then map it on, and you could choose what you want. So if you want to know low-income neighborhoods within Toronto, and you could zoom right in and see exactly the blocks that are low-income versus not low-income, which matters a lot because you're not going to open Louis Vuitton there, but you might open Dollarama, right? So that's a free resource. It's so useful. Goes all across Canada. Create your own charts and write-ups. So this is something I guess is like the basic startup. If this is a DIY tutorial, this is the basic. You just go to CMHC, you're doing housing, search up a town, so you go to the portal at CMHC, you're in Oshawa, you do Oshawa real estate, search up Oshawa, you can even click into the neighborhood you want, and it'll give you a bunch of details, right? And then you Google it, historical data Oshawa, right? Historical data Oshawa, CMHC, and this will come up. And this is like an ugly text chart that they don't want you to use, that's why it's ugly, but you use it anyways. You go into Excel and you just retype the numbers. And when you retype the numbers, you start to see trends. And this is what I do all day. It's I go on Excel and I just put a bunch of numbers in, and I just look for shapes of lines. And if the lines look good, I write about it. The lines look bad, I write about it. If they look whatever, I don't write about it. And this is interesting lines. So I did the exact same thing I did this morning. I just took the rent from here and the supply growth from here. I just plotted it on Excel, and on this side you'll see that I wrote the supply growth here, I wrote the rents there. I just did a simple minus subtracting, so you get completions here, and then boom, and then I charted it. And you can see rent growth is very strong, and completions are very low. So what does that tell you guys? Let's go back to the fundamentals. Now we're using the key terms again, we're using our thinkers. Is fundamentals are strong, low supply, right? Low supply chain, strong price growth. Good fundamentals, invest in Oshawa. So that's the basics, and then you just go into a simple website like Canva or whatever you guys want to use. I don't really use any of them, I use Adobe stuff, and then you just make a little flyer, and then you give it to your customers. You get your name in their mouth. Sweet. That's all, guys. Thanks for listening.